I'm Draken and this is the Draken Games Work, and I know it's been a while since I've done a video, but I wanted to go back and revisit the multi-level water elevator based on the design that appeared at the end of my water elevator video that I released last year. Some of you guys gave some great comments on there, and I wanted to go back and redo that in a way that would actually be nice and functional and show you how we did that as well. So don't go anywhere. So first of all, let's show you how this water elevator works. Now, I would highly recommend going back and checking out my water elevator tutorial that I released last year because it demonstrates a lot of these principles. But essentially, you have a piece of soul sand in the bottom there with a water elevator going up the side. It's being held in place by a couple of spruce hatches on either side there, and obviously the trunks at the back as well. And if we step into this, the bubbles are going to push us all the way up to the top floor. You can see it up into floor 3 there. I've marked each of my floors out. And then we can come back over to here, and we've got the downwards elevator here, and we're just using single blocks of water just to slow our descent, so it brings us back down to the ground floor. Nice and simple. However, should we want to then go and visit another floor, you can see we have 3rd floor lit up here. We could go up, hit the 2nd floor button, like so. It now switches. We step into the water elevator, it takes us up, but it hasn't taken us all the way up to the top. Instead, it's brought us up to the 2nd floor. Now we look at the downwards elevator, and you can see we have multiple buttons again and multiple lights up there. And say we wanted to go to the 1st floor rather than the ground floor. We'd click 1st floor, it lights up to 1st floor, we can walk over, and we drop down onto what is the 1st floor. Now we need to go back up again, as at the moment it's set for 2nd floor. I want to go back up to the 3rd floor, so I'm going to tell it I want to go up to the 3rd floor on this level. And up we go, and we head up to the 3rd floor as such. And then say we want to go back down to the ground floor, we can click that one for example. The ground floor will light up. We can walk over to the side here and drop all the way back down, and we hit the ground floor. So the way this works, as you can see, you have 4 different floors that you can drop off, and you've got a downwards and upwards elevator, and the principle is pretty simple. We're going to hit a button and it's going to block us off depending on where we need to at the floor going up and the floor going down. Rather than going too complex into both sides of it, I want to start with explaining how one side works, and then I'm going to explain how the other side works. So we're going to start with the downwards because that's much easier. So on the downward side, what we do is, as I say, we have all of these water elevators going down. You have a single block of water at each of the floors, which we're going to pass through when we're dropping down. But to stop at the floor that we want, say for example, we want to stop at the 1st floor when we're coming down from the upper story floor here. We're going to hit the 1st floor button here, and it's going to activate a circuit that will then activate one of these hatches. And these hatches will then open up and cover the floor at the 1st floor. So instead of dropping all the way down to the ground, we then hit down to there. And then say if we want to go down to the ground, you can see that hatch then reopens again there, just like so. Okay, before I start explaining how all of this works, as you can see, there is a lot of redstone at the side here. Now, what I want to do for this tutorial is not show you a step-by-step how to build this piece by piece the same way I've done it here, because you might want to build multiple levels, you might want to do different things with it, you might want to use some of these principles for other sort of things out there. So what I wanted to do in this tutorial was, rather than show you how to build it step by step, give you an idea of how all the different individual bits work, so that you get an idea of how to put these together for your own circuits, at least some basic ideas for redstone anyway. Now there's probably some advanced redstone builders out there who could look at this and go, well, we can make this a lot more compact. Yes, you could. They could probably do it in different ways. You could use observer blocks and various other more comparators and stuff like that. But what I wanted to do with this was just give you the basics, show you it nice and laid out in a sort of large way. It looks like a bit of a mess, but hopefully the way I'll describe it and the way I'll show you going through this, we'll be able to actually show you and demonstrate to you all the principles about how this operates and how this functions, and then you can put it together for your own builds and work out your own ways of doing things to go along with it. So I just wanted to give you a bit of an overview on that one before we crack on and actually give you an in-depth discussion about actually how all of this works. I'll start with, as I said, the downward side, and then once we got an idea of how the downward side works, we can look at the upward side, because the upward side isn't much different to the downward side, it just has a few more extra bits on top of it. So let's quickly discuss what we're wanting to achieve with the downward side. We can see there are basically 3 main components to this that we're trying to achieve. First of all, we want to be able to press a button, and this button will activate for all of the floors, not just for the one floor that you press the button, but for all of the floors, to set where the elevator is going to be stopping you at. So we want it to stop at the ground floor, we want to open up all the hatches, we want to go to the 1st floor, we want to close off the 1st floor hatch. We also need it to actually close and open the correct hatches so that we know which ones open and which ones close at the right time. And we also want it to light up these lights so we can actually see whereabouts we're actually currently set to. So we can see that when we press the ground floor light is lit up. If we then go down and hit the first floor, for example, the first floor light is going to light up, the ground floor is going to shut off, and the right hatch is open. So there's 3 main functions that we want to operate with that. The first thing we need to operate and sort out, though, is going to be the switches themselves and making sure that we can set it to the right state as we need it. So before we dive into it too in depth, and I do apologize if for some of you this is a bit basic and you understand these sort of principles, but it's to help some other people out there as well. We want to operate with a form of switch. Now there's a couple of different ways to do switches with redstone. So your redstone normally has an object that powers it, like a switch for example. Then you have your redstone that brings it across, and then to an object that is then activated by the redstone. So in this case, it's quite straightforward. We have a on-off switch. When it's on, a signal continues to flow down, and it then powers up the torch at the end there. And then we turn the switch off, and it unpowers it. Alternatively, you've got buttons. And if you press a button, it only stays on for a very short period of time. It sends a pulse of a signal down, and as you can see, when we press it, it sends a pulse very briefly, and then it switches itself back off again. Now, this is where we encounter a bit of a problem, because we can't put switches like this on every single floor, because we need to be able to press a button on every floor. If we just had a switch, only the switch would work on the floor that you flick the switch with, and you can't force the other switches to turn on and off. So you're going to need buttons, but we need a consistent, continuous signal. So we need to be able to have a way in which our buttons on the various different floors you can see over there can be pressed, and when they're pressed, they're going to turn around and put a state block in elsewhere, so that we can have multiple buttons coming in and making the whole circuit continuous. And one way we can do that is that you have these redstone blocks. Now a redstone block in contact with a redstone signal is going to continuously power the item at the end there, as you can see here, very much like if you just turned on a switch over there. The advantage here though is that we can do other stuff with the redstone block that you can't do with switches. And so we're going to come over to this, where we're going to demonstrate a different style of switch. So we're using buttons at the back here which will send pulses, but these are, instead of powering a torch, they're powering pistons. And note, these are normal pistons, they are not sticky pistons. But in between the 2 pistons there is a redstone block, and if we press this button, the piston is going to extend and then retract again. But what it's done is it's pushed the redstone block over to here to another line of redstone, which then turns that redstone on permanently. So this switch, we've turned a push button switch into a permanent switch. So it turns around, when we press it, it's permanently put it on, and then we can press another button on the opposite piston, and that's going to push the redstone block back over, and it's going to turn off the light at the end there. Why is that more useful than the other switches? It's because we can put multiple buttons now coming into the same line into this piston, which means we can have multiple buttons permanently turn on a light, and then multiple buttons permanently turn it off. So we can have multiple signal sources going into the same place. Okay, so coming back to our circuit, you can see we have multiple lines of redstone going around. I've marked them all out with different coloured walls. It makes it a bit easier to be able to actually... It's a good little tip, is that using wool to mark out where your redstone lines are, so that you've got an idea of which line is doing which, and you can see where it's flowing to. But we can see you've also got these little platforms that I put in here. I consider them a bit like circuit boards in some senses. This is where we're doing some of the main functions that we need to do. If we come down to here, you can see this is one of the areas where we're toggling the hatch for the first floor. So if we come around to the front, we have the hatch here that you can see is currently closed, and that's because we've got the first floor lit up. So that hatch is currently in its closed position, and behind there it's being powered by this line here. In fact, actually, when the line is off, the hatch is closed, and when the line is on, the hatch is open. And you can see, as we were just demonstrating back there, we have one of those redstone switches, redstone block switches that we were just talking about. We have 2 pistons and a redstone block, and then when we need that hatch to open, we send a signal down this line coming here, this brown line coming down here. That will push this piston, that will push the redstone block over into the middle here, and that will then power up the line, which will open that hatch. And then when we need it to close off again, for example, when we need to go to the first floor, we send a signal down this sort of turquoise coloured line. Couldn't think of the colour there for a second. Down this turquoise line, and it will activate this piston and push the redstone block back across, which will then close the actual hatch off again, and that will enable that to mean that the first floor is able to be dropped off again. And you can see this simple switch is actually used throughout. So we use this to toggle the hatch over there, and we also use it to toggle the hatch above. This is exactly the same thing here. We have exactly the same style switch. So that's how we're toggling both of those hatches on the first and second floor. We don't need to toggle a hatch on the third floor because the third floor is always going to be open. And obviously at the ground floor, there's no need for a hatch because you're at the bottom anyway. So there's only 2 floors that we actually need to toggle hatches on. That's the first and the second. However, we do need to demonstrate lights to all 4 floors. but we do exactly the same. So this one here, this is demonstrating our lights to all three areas. So you see the three lights over here. So you've got these three lights up the top here. And again, we just need to power them on and power them off. And again, we just have signals coming into these blocks. Now there are three lights because we need to know which floor you're dropping to, whether it's the ground floor, the first floor, or the second floor. And when we receive a signal down, like for example this turquoise one, it will push this across, it will turn off, oh, hopefully not open up the inventory there, but it will turn off this signal here, and that will then turn around and change the lights over here, and again on this one. And one of the things I've done here as well, is just to make it easy, as I say, this is quite a spaced out circuit, and it helps sometimes if you're trying to understand Redstone for the first time, is to mark things up where they're going. For example, I have little signposts here telling me this is the light toggle for the first floor, that's the light toggle for the ground floor, and over here we've got the light toggle for the second floor. And again, all three of them have these redstone block piston switch designs here that will turn around and turn on and off as we need them. Now, before we go any further, I just feel it's a good idea just to go over a few other little redstone basics about transferring these redstone wire circuits along here. As you can see, we do have these various different coloured circuits going across here, but I just wanted to quickly talk about how we transfer these signals across effectively for your circuits here. One principle that's worth understanding is that a redstone signal from its source block can only go up to about 15 blocks length, and then it needs to be able to be boosted, and this is where we use what's called a repeater. So here on the left you can see that you've got a signal here going beyond 15 blocks. The signal isn't able to power the block at the end because it's too far away. On the right we've put a repeater into place. Now repeaters have multiple different functions that we will discuss in the course of this video, but one of the functions here is that we can put it somewhere in the line here, and as long as it's there before the 15 blocks it will extend the signal and it will go for another 15 blocks after the repeater. So it's a way of extending the strength of the signal. So on the right here you can see the redstone block is powering it along, goes into the repeater, and it's able to power then the block at the end. Next I want to cover redstone torch basics. Redstone torches are always powered on, a bit like the redstone block. When you put it next to a line of redstone it will power it up, and then it will obviously turn on your source, your item to be powered at the end there, in this case our lantern there, our lamp there. Another way in which you can do it, you can actually put it on the block next to it. So just like you see here, we have a block, we have the torch held on the side, and it's still powering up the redstone lamp there. But one of the principles with redstone torch is that when you send a signal into the block that the redstone torch is on, it will turn the redstone torch off. So in this case you can see we've got a redstone block here, it's sending a signal over into the block that the redstone torch is attached to, and that therefore turns off the block here. Now that's really useful for a lot of things and functionality that we will need to be looking at. So one of the principles that we use this for then is we use this for powering up our lights. So imagine this is very much like our lights that we have, which shows which floor you get off at. It's showing that you have each of these torches next to it, and now we're actually able to power these blocks independently without the actual signals connecting to each other in a little pattern like this. So we can actually power up the back of this block with a signal coming through here, the middle one that we then send over the top and attach at the top here, and that's not actually connecting to the side blocks here, and vice the same here is the same as the first one. So none of these actual lines, because sometimes if you put your lines side by side they will connect, and when they connect you end up with signals interfering with each other. These lines are all actually separate, so we can turn on the light here and that turns on just that one, hit that switch, hits the next light on, and if we come over here and turn that switch on, it turns that one off, and we can turn these all off independently as well. As you can see, it knocks them all off independently, which is a very useful function of redstone torches. Another good function for redstone torches is a way of actually lifting the signal up. So there are two ways you can move a signal upwards when, say for example, you've got one on one level and you need to be powering up something at a different level. One is that we could be turning around and just using steps like this. So we can just step it up and the signal comes up to the top block, and then we can just turn this off and the signal will turn off. But sometimes your space isn't going to permit for that, or sometimes it's a bit neater or a bit easier just to turn around and put the signal through in a different way, where we want just a vertical stack going up like this. Now remember what we were saying about a redstone torch. If there's power going into the block, the redstone torch will turn off, otherwise the redstone torch is permanently on. So you can see this bottom torch is on because there's no signal going in at the moment, this line is off. But the one above it does have a signal going in because this torch here is powering this block, therefore this torch here is going to be turned off. But because this one's turned off, this block now has no power on it at all above it, and that one means this one is now going to be on, and it continues on up for as long as you need it to be, basically, on this. Now if we change it over, we can actually reverse the way it works by turning this on and powering up this line. That then turns this bottom torch off because there's power going into the bottom one, and we now get the reverse happening, and that means our top one activates and lights up there. So it's just a different way in which we can transfer things up. Now, the reason why I want to quickly cover that is just so that you understood this when you're looking, when we're going around this and looking through this, and later on I'll actually go through each bit and we'll follow a line through, but you can understand now why we have torches coming up like this. That's giving it an idea of how to bring the signals upwards. You can also understand now when you see over here, we can see that principle we were talking about with the 3 torches side by side to power up the lights here. That's what we're doing here. We've got power coming into this block from the side, we've got power coming in from this side onto this block, and then we've got our redstone line over the top here as well for the middle one as well, so that we can keep them all independently done. And you can also see that we're using a lot of repeaters along the way here as well, just to be able to boost signals as well where we've got long lengths that we need to be covering. Probably a bit more repeaters than we actually need. I just like to be on the safe side. I normally do it after 10 blocks. I know 15 is the actual total, but I normally like to stay on the safe side a little bit. But yes, there's repeaters all the way through here, so it's using those repeaters in that same process of just basically moving the signal along, basically. As you can see over here as well, you can see all these lines coming around from here, and they've all got the repeaters on here. It's just so that you understand why that is like it is. Right, so we have an understanding now how these redstone block switches are working, how they're turning on and off the lights, and how they're toggling the hatches. Both the hatches and the lights have a similar principle. They just need to be powered on or they need to be powered off. And that's all we're doing from here is sending these signals out. But we need to know when we need to actually turn these signals on and when to turn them off. And with that, I have this board over here. Now, there's nothing, this looks a little bit complicated, but actually what it is doing is basically taking the signal from the buttons that we press and is basically working out from the button that we press which signals we need to be turning on. Before we get too in depth into that, we need to understand that obviously we have multiple buttons coming in to a source here. So if we wanted 2 buttons to power up the same thing at the end, we can just attach the buttons together on the same redstone circuit, as you can see here, and either button here will power up what you've got at the end there. Now that's all well and said, but you may notice we have 2 toggles, 3 lights. The way it balances isn't necessarily the same for every single time, because we may want to press one button and it will turn off 2 different lights, but also another button may want to turn off one of those lights but not the other. So we need to sort the signal out when it comes through so we know what it's doing. Now the problem we've got if we do this, say for example this yellow one, if we wanted the yellow button here to actually activate the right block and the left block, but the red button on the left to only activate the left block, attaching it up the way we've done there doesn't work, because we press that button and both light up, and we press that button and both light up. That's not going to do our principles, and this is where the repeater also has another function. You see, because you have these 2 little sticks sticking up in the middle there, one of which is on this line here. Now that has a purpose as well, which we'll explain later on in the video, but one of the things to know is that the signal always comes in from behind this line and goes out the other side. If a signal comes from the opposite direction, the signal will stop. It is a one-way system, so we can then determine that if we press this button, the signal is able to pass through because it's coming through the actual past this line side and up into that side, so it will power up both lights. But now if we press the red one, only the left one will light up, and that's because the signal goes along and it hits this repeater and the repeater is blocking it. With that in mind, that's all that's happening in this place here. We are basically bringing signals in from the buttons. So if we come around to here, say we'll take the orange line, and you can see here we've got the lines coming around here, and this line has come from all the buttons sitting on the various different floors that say that they're allowing for the ground floor. As it comes into here, obviously it hits the repeater, and we're going to start splitting the signal up. Now I got this split into a number of outputs. So one of the first things we need to know is which hatch we need to toggle. So we have a bunch of outputs here, a bunch of lines that are going out to our boards down there. And you've got first floor open, first floor closed, telling us whether we need to have the floor hatch open on the first floor or closed, open or closed. And the same with the second floor hatch. So we can see this orange signal is coming in here, and it goes out of this one that says first floor open. We want it to be open. It doesn't connect to the first floor closed because we don't want it to be closed, we want it to be open. But it does come around here, we can see it's just sort of tucked in underneath here, but it comes around to this one, which is the second floor open as well. Because if you want to go to the ground floor, you need all your hatches open. So this signal is coming to these 2, and you can see this is the brown and the black lines here. If we follow this brown line down, this brings us back to our redstone switch here, and you can see that would power up this piston, which will put this block into place. And remember, with these hatches that we use on the lift here, when they're powered, they are downwards, which means they are technically open for what we need. So it'll push this across and open up the hatch at the bottom there to enable the ground floor to be accessed. And likewise, it's also sending a signal down the black line to the one above it as well, which does exactly the same thing. It'll press this piston across and open up that line there. Coming back up to it, where our orange signal comes in from the button, you'll also see it comes up and over the top here. And what this does is it's now going off to one of a number of these switches over here, or one of these outputs here. So if we just follow one down here, we come down here and it goes to ground floor light on. And the reason it goes to ground floor light on is obviously we need to illustrate that the ground floor light is on. But we also need to tell the system that the first and the second floor lights are going to be switched off. So you can see it also comes over the top here and connects onto this side here, which is listed as first floor light off. So it connects up with one of these circuits over here and does that. And it'll also do it, as you can see, it comes off the top here down onto here, and it'll also go to the second floor light off. So it's telling these two lights to be off and this light on. And if you follow, say we take this one, the ground floor light on, the turquoise, well, light blue line I should say on that one, around to here, and you can see it powers up the piston for the light toggle for the ground floor. It'll push it off that one, which will turn the light on because it's getting the light opposite. These act in the opposite because it's turning the torch on and off at the other end there, but yeah, it will toggle that one on and off. And likewise, then the other two signals it comes down to the appropriate ones over here as well. And that's all it's literally doing. We do exactly the same with the green line, and we do exactly the same with the grey line, and these are actually representing the switches from the first floor and also the second floor button switches when you press them in here. And it's just basically sorting the signal out when it comes in as to what you want switched on and what you want switched off. Now, sometimes the lines have to connect in with other lines, as is always, as is expected. For example, here we have this green line here. This is going from the first floor button. Now, if your first floor button is pressed or your ground floor button is pressed, you want to make sure that the second floor light is always switched off. So both these lines, the green line and the orange line, need to go down here. But that said, you don't want the signal to also be powering up the ground floor button if you're pressing the first floor, the ground floor light if you're pressing the second floor button. So we have to make sure we include repeaters at these points here as basically the one-way system gate to make sure that the signal's always going to go in the direction that you want it to. So normally wherever you've got them joining, these lines joining here, just before they join together, it's worth putting somewhere in that line a repeater just to make it one way, and that prevents the signal sort of flowing in the wrong direction and powering up something you don't want it to power up. So hopefully, I know Redstone's a little bit complex, but hopefully that explains what's going on with these. We can actually follow this through with, if we actually do a demonstration here and follow it through, say we want to go up to the second floor. So let's, we're on the second floor. So we're on the top floor here and we want to go down to the second floor. So we're going to press this button here. Now, if we come behind here, we can see that the second floor button is powered by the grey line here. That's right behind that second floor button. The grey line is going to come all the way down here, and you can see it's running just underneath these other lines here. Probably chose the wrong one to pick up because it's underneath everything, but there we are, it is running underneath all of these. Pops up here and it pops up to our sorting board here. So it's saying there, obviously coming from the second floor button. When it comes into here, it drops around over to this side and it's going to turn around and tell that it wants the second floor to be closed as a hatch. And what I've also done with this one is it bounces up here and it closes off the first floor as well. So it shuts down all the floors. It only needs, because you want to be landing on the second floor. And then in addition to this, the signal is going to come down to here and it's going to go out the outputs then to turn the second floor light on, as you see there, but also turn off the first floor light and also turn off the ground floor light. These signals are then going down to the appropriate Redstone switches, puts them into the correct position, that then turns on or off the devices at the end as we need it to. So you could, for example, follow, say, this green one here. Say we wanted to go second floor light on. If we follow this, we go around on this yellow circuit here, yellow line. The yellow line connects down here, powers this piston, pushes this over, and then this is now off because the redstone torch is going to take it the opposite direction. Remember, a redstone torch is powered on when there's no signal going into it, and we're ending at a redstone torch going into the lanterns because they're side by side. And so we can follow this red line around, and this will split this line into the 3 different floors. So we're sending the signal in 3 different locations because we need the light showing up on every floor. If we follow the one up the top here, you can see it comes into the back of this block. Because this is powered off, this redstone torch is on. The other 2 are powered, so they are off. And you can see the redstone lantern is switched on as we require it to be. Okay, so the upwards elevator works very similar to the downwards elevator in the terms of the redstone behind there. There are some additional things we need to consider, but the first thing we need to understand is how the upwards elevator works generally anyway. So we have the soul stand at the bottom there. It's powering up all these source blocks of water, pushing the bubbles up, which then forces you to rise to the top. When we want to then get off at a different floor, say we want to get off at the first floor, so we press this button here and we go back up. You can see on the first floor what it's done is this block has now come out and stopped the route upwards. So when you come up, you will hit this block and you'll be at the block that you need to be. And that operates by simply there being a piston behind there that's pushing this block in the way. Where it gets a bit more complicated, and I'll show you this when we put the floor back up to third floor, is the block will withdraw, and you hear it. There we are. There is that sound of water being dispensed. And the reason being is that you need source blocks going all the way up. And if you just put the block out, it will destroy the source block of water and break the bubble elevator. So we have this dispenser to put a block of water back in place after the piston withdraws. Now, if you would see my old video that I did with the water elevators, you will know that I did a very basic idea at the end of this idea of different ways of doing water elevators. And with that one, we had multiple buckets of water. You don't need to do that. You can have just one bucket of water in that dispenser. If you have a way of having the redstone withdraw the water first before the piston goes out, it then brings back a full bucket of water into the piston. You then dispense, the piston then comes out, and then you get stopped at that floor. And then when you need to go back up again, the piston goes back out and it puts the water back in place, reconnecting the whole water elevator going up beyond that floor. So if we come behind here to the circuit, we can see the circuit is actually very similar to the circuit that we have for the downwards elevator. So we have a bunch of wires coming off the side here. That's coming from the switches, from the buttons, and also leading to the lights itself. Each of these are on different colored lines. All the buttons lead to this area. This is basically the same as our processing board before here. This is basically saying when you press this button, you need to go out to these lights and over to these toggles for the switches on the elevator itself. So that's all this board is doing. This is no different to the board we've got here. It's a bit bigger, but that just makes it a bit easier to see where we were going when I was designing it. But it is basically that same principle. Signal comes in from the buttons and goes out. Above it, we have here three switches, three redstone block switches. These are the lights. So this is telling whether the lights need to be toggled on and off in exactly the same way as our downward elevators were doing as well, with the lights going off to the correct locations and powering up the right ones as we need it. Where it all starts to differ is over here. This is the board that deals with the mechanisms that are going to block off the floors or open up the floors as required. Whereas before we just needed to toggle a hatch, now we need to toggle a piston and also a dispenser. And we also need to get it in the right order, because depending on whether you're opening up the stream, in which case you need to withdraw the piston and dispense a bucket of water, or whether we're blocking it off, in which case we need to withdraw the water first and then open up the piston, we need to determine which way around that is occurring and make sure that it occurs in that order and not at the same time, which would then break the mechanism otherwise. So that's what this circuit board is currently demonstrating at the moment. At its very most basic, we have a redstone switch like we had before, and that powers on this block here, this line over here, which will power up the piston. That's not too dissimilar to what we were doing with toggling the hatch before. So that piston is powered up by just a single line being run off the redstone block. What changes it is these two little bits of circuit here to activate the dispenser. To explain the challenges that we have with water dispensers, it's a good idea to first of all get an understanding how these dispensers work. So this dispenser you see in front of us has a single bucket of water. Now, if we put power to it in a very brief burst, like we do with the button, you can see it drops water straight out of it. However, if we press it again, it then withdraws it. And that's from one bucket of water, and that same bucket of water has now gone back into the dispenser. The problem is, if we've got continuous signal going to it, like for example with this switch, if we were just to turn it on, and like what happens when we convert the button over into a solid signal using our redstone block method with the pistons, then what happens is that we power this on, and you can see the water comes off. Now when we turn it off, the water remains. That's because the dispenser works every time there's a signal sent to it, not just when it's turned on and off. This means that we need to send one signal to turn around and say, right, you need to dispense the water, and that signal then needs to stop. And then we need to send a second signal to say, withdraw the water, and then that signal needs to stop. So we can't just run on a continuous thing like this, because you're going to need to turn it on and off several times. So that requires a little bit more thought into how we do this. So going back to our repeaters, and you remember earlier I mentioned about these two sticks that we have sticking up and this line here. Now if you right click a repeater, you can see that stick on the right there is moving across the line. That's because repeaters also slow signal going through them, and depending on where you set that stick to depends on how much delay is put going through it. And if you put several repeaters in the line with their sticks opened up like I have here, you can really slow the signal down. Let's give a demonstration here, for example. So if we power this on, you'll see the right one turns on first and then the left one turns off shortly afterwards. Now the same thing happens when you turn them off. So when it loses power, the right one immediately turns off and then the left one turns off shortly afterwards as well. So again, we turn the right one on, first one goes on immediately and the second one shortly afterwards, and again when we turn it off. Now that's really useful because that means we can then add some timing into our circuits to determine whether the bucket is being dispensed first or second, depending on where it is in relation to the piston. So what we do over here, and we'll come back to this in a second, but you can see after these couple of bits of circuit we'll come back to in a minute, you can see we have some of these repeaters on time delays. And you've got 2 on the main line going through to the piston, and we have 3 on this line going over here, and we have none that are actually in a time state. These are actually in the short state here, but none in a time state going over there. And what this is doing is it's saying, well, it depends on what the signal is that we're needing. So as long as we can determine whether the signal is needing to go first or second, depending on whether it's opening or closing, we can then actually time the signal. So for example, we come down here and you can see when this comes across and this is going to push the piston open, it's also going to send a signal down here. And when it comes through here, it's going to come through here pretty much near enough immediately, and it's going to activate the dispenser. And in this occasion, this is when the water is already there, so it's going to draw the dispenser off. This one's on a 2 repeaters with the ticks open there, so the delay's expanded there, and so that will then activate second and push the block over. Now when this redstone switch moves over to here, it's powering a different circuit, which is this line here, and this one has 3 of these repeaters on timer, which is longer than these 2. So when this comes over, it unpowers this. This will go for a time when it goes through there, but still nonetheless, because 2 is less than 3, this piston will still withdraw first, and then the power will come over and then activate this dispenser, which will then cause the water to be dispensed, which will then put the water block back, which puts it in the right order. So depending which direction we need to put it, puts it in the correct order. Now, while that sorts out the order in which we need the dispenser and the piston to be working, what we also need to do is turn the dispenser into a pulse signal rather than into a continuous signal. So that's what this circuit over here is doing. So if we turn this on, which is normally continuous, you can see the torch only pulses on briefly. We turn it off and I can do that again, watch the torch at the end, and you see it only pulses on briefly, yet this is a switch with a continuous power supply. And the way this works, and I've got to thank Avomances videos for this one. He demonstrated this circuit quite nicely, and I'll link that circuit, that video up in the descriptions below as well. But you have this little circuit here, which basically will turn a signal from being a continuous signal into a pulse when it's first turned on. And the way this works is essentially we have a comparator. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail about comparators, but basically what they do is it gives out a signal input based on whether the signal coming at the side and the signal coming at the back is the same or not. When it's the same, it is switched off. That comparator doesn't give a power. When it's different, it sends a signal out. So when it's off, like so, there is no signal going out at all. However, when we turn it on, you get this brief flash, and what's happening is that the signal is going in straight at the back. That gives it power initially at the back, first of all, and it's got the powered signal, and then the second line goes through here and goes through a timed repeater as well, another timed repeater, and that slows the signal down ever so slightly on the side here and then powers into the side. So for a brief second, these are different, and that then creates the pulse of a signal at the end, and then when they're the same, it shuts it back off again. Now we use this very function twice over here into our circuit lines over here. So there's one there and there's one there, and that will then turn off our dispenser and deal with our dispensers on the side there. Okay, so if we once again demonstrate how this flows from beginning to end, if we click second floor like so, and then we come around the back here and you see that's coming out of the orange line. So the orange line comes over here, meets up with other orange lines from other buttons that are also set up for this same floor, and sends in a signal into our board over here that says it's coming from the second floor switch. This signal then needs to be split up. It needs to be split up into the locations which is going to turn on the lights, and also where it's going to toggle which actual mechanisms are going to open and close on the different floors. So the first lines we've got here coming up over the top here, you've got a line coming in here, which is going to turn around and tell the third floor light to be switched off. It is also coming over the top here and meeting over here to turn and say the second floor light needs to be on because we've pressed the second floor light. And then if we follow it over once more, you can see this comes down to here and it also turns on the first floor light, or sorry, turns off the first floor light, I should say. That's what it says there. Obviously, we don't want that to be on when we're going to the second floor. Then also the signal needs to go to 2 other locations. So we can see it comes over the top here and carries on over to here. And that's telling us that the first floor needs to be open because if we're going to the second floor, we still need to go through the first floor, so that needs to be open. But we do need to close the second floor. And if you come over here, you can see the signal comes down here. And if you look at the way the repeaters are actually angled, the signal will go this way through. So it'll go from right to left here into this line, but it won't come back up this way. So it's going to go and carry on down this grey line, and it's going to have the second floor is going to be closed, coming up this pink line. So if we go up this pink line as an example, you can say this is saying that this needs to be closed off to stop people going any further than the second floor. This comes over here, powers on this piston. That will push this redstone block over to this side. Then 2 things are going to happen. It's going to send a signal down here and the signal is going to split into 2 locations. The faster of the 2 lines is this one. So you're going to get a signal coming into this comparator. That's going to briefly send a signal down here, but then shut it back off again because we have this little converter circuit here that will convert it from being a continuous signal into a pulse. That pulse will immediately go down here and it will activate this dispenser, and that will withdraw the water block that's in front of it. Meanwhile, the other line going down here is running as a continuous signal, but is slower than this one because we've got these 2 repeaters here set up to delay the signal going through, and then will come through and then push this piston after the dispenser is activated across into the middle there. If we were to reverse things, the signal would come down into this piston over here, push this redstone block across. That would unpower this one over here, and this would go first. Even though it's got these 2 repeaters on here, it's still faster than the 3 over here. So the piston would withdraw, which would open up that from the thing, and then this signal would have also gone through here, turned into a pulse just like it did over the other side, and then goes for a slightly slower circuit, so this will happen second, and dispense the water back in front of the piston, therefore recreating the stream going upwards and reconnecting our elevator going up to the top. And there we have it. That is the multi-level water elevator system, along with an explanation of the redstone behind there. Hopefully my explanations about the redstone made sense. Hopefully that will help you guys build similar sort of ideas for your own worlds. I'd be intrigued to see what you come up with. It does work with 2 separate streams. I suppose there could be a possibility of doing one which works from the same stream. That could be a different challenge for maybe a different time, but not for this video. But hopefully that will make sense. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Did that make sense? Was that clear? Is there anything you need me to explain better? Have you got other ideas about how it could be done or ways to make it even more efficient? I'd love to hear it all from you guys. Let me know. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, and you should be seeing up on the screen now some videos, one of which is something from my own playlist and something there that will be from your own selections that YouTube has chosen from your algorithms. Hope you guys all have a wonderful and great day. Thank you.